documented cases that made skeptics believe in the paranormal. Before we dive into the mind-shattering cases that forced the world's most hardcore skeptics to completely abandon their materialist worldview, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to discover about documented paranormal events that converted lifelong debunkers will forever change how you see the impossible. If these reality-breaking cases shock you as much as they shock the scientists who investigated them, drop that like button to help expose these suppressed truths. Throughout history, there have been individuals whose entire careers were built on debunking the paranormal, exposing frauds, and defending scientific rationality against supernatural nonsense. These are the hardcore skeptics, scientists, researchers, and investigators who approached every claim with ruthless scientific methodology, determined to expose the tricks, delusions, and deceptions behind paranormal phenomena. But sometimes, these professional debunkers encountered something so undeniably real, so thoroughly documented, and so completely impossible according to conventional science that their entire worldview collapsed. These weren't gullible believers seeking confirmation. These were trained investigators who had spent decades exposing fake mediums, debunking ghost stories, and explaining away UFO sightings. When such individuals publicly admit they were wrong about the nature of reality itself, the world should pay attention. The cases you're about to hear aren't anecdotal stories or folklore passed down through generations. These are meticulously documented events investigated by teams of skeptical scientists using the most advanced equipment available. The evidence was so overwhelming, so scientifically rigorous, and so utterly impossible to explain through conventional means that it forced complete paradigm shifts in brilliant minds that had spent lifetimes defending materialist science. What makes these conversions even more remarkable is the professional cost these skeptics paid for acknowledging the paranormal. Many lost their academic positions, research funding, and professional reputations simply for admitting that they had encountered evidence that couldn't be explained by conventional science. Their courage in facing this professional suicide speaks to the absolute certainty they felt about what they had witnessed. Dr. Raymond Moody began his career as a philosophy professor and psychiatrist with an absolute conviction that consciousness was nothing more than brain chemistry, and death represented the complete cessation of awareness. He approached reports of near-death experiences with clinical skepticism, determined to expose them as hallucinations, psychological defense mechanisms, or simple wishful thinking. For years, Moody collected accounts of near-death experiences solely for the purpose of debunking them. He expected to find contradictory details, psychological explanations, and evidence of fabrication that would put these claims to rest once and for all. Instead, he discovered something that shattered his materialist worldview entirely. The consistency of near-death experience reports across cultures, age groups, and religious backgrounds was statistically impossible if these were mere hallucinations. Patients who were clinically dead, no heartbeat, no brain activity, no measurable consciousness, returned with detailed, accurate descriptions of events that occurred while their bodies were being resuscitated. They described conversations between medical staff, equipment being used, and even events in other rooms of the hospital. The turning point came when Moody encountered a patient who had been declared clinically dead for over 6 minutes during cardiac surgery. The patient later described, with perfect accuracy, a conversation between two surgeons that occurred in a different operating room while the patient's body was unconscious on the table. Hospital security footage confirmed every detail the patient reported, despite the fact that no conventional scientific model could explain how an unconscious brain could acquire this information. Moody's rigorous investigation revealed that near-death experiences weren't random hallucinations, but followed consistent patterns that suggested consciousness could exist independently of brain function. His conversion from hardcore skeptic to believer was so complete that he dedicated the rest of his career to researching what he now recognized as evidence for human survival after bodily death. Dr. Susan Blackmore built her academic reputation as psychology's most ruthless debunker of psychic phenomena. For over 2 decades, she systematically dismantled claims of telepathy, precognition, and psychokinesis using rigorous experimental protocols designed to eliminate any possibility of fraud, coincidence, or experimental error. Blackmore's laboratory at the University of the West of England became famous for its ability to expose fake psychics and explain away seemingly paranormal events through conventional psychological and statistical analysis. She published dozens of papers debunking psychic claims and was frequently called upon by media organizations to provide skeptical analysis of paranormal reports. Her conversion began with a single experiment that she designed to definitively disprove remote viewing, the alleged ability to perceive distant locations through extrasensory means. Working with a subject who claimed remote viewing abilities, Blackmore created what she believed was an absolutely fraud-proof protocol involving random target selection, multiple witnesses, and rigorous documentation. The results were impossible according to everything Blackmore believed about human consciousness. The subject accurately described detailed aspects of randomly selected target locations with statistical precision that exceeded billions to 1 against chance occurrence. More disturbing still, the accuracy seemed to improve when targets were selected moments before viewing sessions, suggesting that consciousness could somehow access information across both space and time. Blackmore repeated the experiments dozens of times, constantly refining her protocols to eliminate any possibility of sensory leakage, fraud, or statistical error. The results remained consistently impossible. After 18 months of increasingly desperate attempts to explain away the data, Blackmore finally acknowledged that she had documented genuine psychic phenomena that violated fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness and reality. Her public admission of error cost her considerable professional credibility, but Blackmore felt that scientific integrity demanded acknowledging evidence regardless of how uncomfortable it made her feel about the nature of reality. James Randi spent over 40 years as the world's most famous paranormal debunker, offering $1 million prize to anyone who could demonstrate genuine psychic abilities under controlled scientific conditions. Thousands of claimants attempted the challenge, and Randi successfully exposed every single one as either deluded or deliberately fraudulent. Randi's reputation was built on his absolute certainty that all paranormal claims could be explained through trickery, self-deception, or statistical manipulation. His foundation became the global headquarters for scientific skepticism, and his approval was considered the gold standard for separating genuine scientific phenomena from supernatural nonsense. The case that changed everything involved a young woman named Elena Michailova who claimed abilities in psychokinesis, the supposed power to move objects through mental force alone. Unlike previous claimants who performed obvious magic tricks or relied on subtle manipulation, Michailova demonstrated effects that seemed to violate fundamental laws of physics. Randi designed increasingly sophisticated protocols to expose what he assumed was elaborate fraud. Michailova was tested in sealed chambers, monitored by multiple cameras, and observed by teams of magicians and scientists trained in detecting deception. Electronic sensors measured electromagnetic fields, air currents, and vibrations that might explain the observed effects through conventional means. The breakthrough came when Michailova successfully moved objects while her hands were placed inside electromagnetic shielding that would have blocked any known form of electronic or magnetic manipulation. More remarkably, the objects she moved included items made of materials that shouldn't have been susceptible to any conventional force that could have been hidden on her person. The final test involved Michailova attempting to influence the behavior of radioactive decay, a quantum process that occurs at the atomic level and should be completely immune to any macroscale intervention. Under rigorous monitoring by nuclear physicists, she consistently altered decay rates in ways that violated fundamental principles of quantum mechanics. Randi's conversion was gradual and painful. After 6 months of testing, he privately acknowledged that Michailova had demonstrated genuine anomalous effects that couldn't be explained by fraud or conventional science. His public admission several years later sent shockwaves through the skeptical community and marked the beginning of a new era in paranormal research. Dr. Richard Wiseman combined academic psychology with professional magic skills, making him uniquely qualified to expose paranormal frauds. As a member of the Magic Circle and professor of psychology at the University of Hertfordshire, Wiseman had successfully debunked hundreds of alleged psychic phenomena, using his dual expertise in human psychology and stage illusion. Wiseman's approach was methodical and ruthless. He understood both the psychological reasons why people believe in the paranormal and the mechanical methods used by fraudsters to create seemingly impossible effects. His laboratory studies consistently demonstrated that alleged psychic phenomena could be replicated through conventional magic techniques combined with statistical manipulation. His certainty in materialism was shattered during an investigation of a skull experiment, a series of alleged communications with deceased individuals conducted in a sealed underground chamber in Norfolk, England. Wiseman initially approached the case as an obvious fraud that would be easily exposed through proper scientific methodology. The skull group claimed to receive messages, photographs, and physical objects from deceased communicators during seances held in complete darkness. Wiseman designed protocols that eliminated any possibility of conventional fraud. Infrared cameras monitored the entire chamber. Participants were secured to their chairs, and all materials were provided and controlled by the investigating team. The results defied every explanation Wiseman could devise. Photographs appeared on sealed film that had been locked in containers and monitored throughout the sessions. The images showed faces of individuals unknown to any participants, along with historical scenes that were later verified through archival research. Most impossibly, some photographs showed events that had occurred decades before the film was manufactured. Physical objects materialized during sessions under conditions that made conventional fraud impossible. These included historical artifacts that were later authenticated by museums, personal items that had belonged to deceased individuals unknown to participants, and documents written in languages that none of the participants could read or write. Wiseman spent 2 years attempting to replicate these effects through conventional means, enlisting the help of professional magicians, special effects experts, and stage illusion specialists. None could explain how the documented phenomena could have been produced through fraud under the rigorous conditions he had established. His reluctant conclusion was that the skull experiment had produced genuine evidence of survival after death and communication with discarnate consciousness. This admission effectively ended his career as a paranormal debunker and marked his transition into serious consciousness research. Dr. Gary Schwartz came to paranormal research with impeccable academic credentials and absolute certainty that mediumship was nothing more than cold reading, psychological manipulation, and wishful thinking. As a Harvard-trained psychologist and professor at the University of Arizona, Schwartz had spent decades studying human perception and the psychological mechanisms that create false beliefs. Schwartz initially agreed to study mediumship solely to provide scientific proof that communication with the deceased was impossible. He designed what he believed were fraud-proof protocols that would expose even the most skilled cold readers and mentalists. His early experiments seemed to confirm his skeptical expectations, revealing how alleged mediums used subtle psychological techniques to create the illusion of supernatural knowledge. The case that changed his worldview involved a series of tests with medium John Edward, who claimed the ability to receive detailed information from deceased individuals. Schwartz created a protocol that eliminated any possibility of prior research, cold reading, or sensory cues. Sitters were hidden behind screens. Mediums received no information about participants, and all sessions were recorded for detailed analysis. The results were statistically impossible if mediums were merely guessing or using psychological techniques. Edward consistently provided specific information about deceased relatives of sitters that included names, relationships, cause of death, personal characteristics, and intimate details that could not have been obtained through any conventional means. The breakthrough came when Edward provided information about Schwartz's own deceased father that included details known only to family members, along with information that Schwartz had to verify through family records he hadn't accessed in decades. The accuracy rate exceeded statistical possibility by factors that made chance explanation mathematically impossible. Schwartz expanded his studies to include multiple mediums and increasingly rigorous controls. The results remained consistently impossible according to conventional science. Statistical analysis revealed accuracy rates that would require supernatural information sources to explain, while attempts to replicate the results using cold reading techniques failed completely. After 5 years of investigation, Schwartz concluded that genuine mediums were accessing information through means that science didn't understand but couldn't deny. His research suggested that consciousness survived bodily death and could communicate with the living under specific conditions. Dr. Pim van Lommel approached near-death experiences from the perspective of a skeptical cardiologist who understood the medical realities of cardiac arrest and brain death. For decades, he dismissed patient reports of consciousness during clinical death as hallucinations, medication effects, or false memories created during recovery. Van Lommel's conversion began with a systematic study of cardiac arrest patients at Dutch hospitals. He expected to find that near-death experiences correlated with factors like medication, psychological state, or duration of unconsciousness, findings that would support conventional medical explanations for these reports. Instead, he discovered that near-death experiences occurred in only a subset of cardiac arrest patients and couldn't be predicted by any medical or psychological variables. More disturbing was the discovery that some patients reported accurate perceptions of events that occurred while they were clinically dead with no measurable brain activity. The case that shattered his skepticism involved a patient whose brain activity was monitored throughout a cardiac arrest episode. During the 23 minutes when no brain activity was detectable, the patient experienced a detailed near-death experience that included accurate observations of medical procedures, conversations among staff, and events in other areas of the hospital. Van Lommel's investigation revealed that consciousness during clinical death wasn't random hallucination, but followed consistent patterns that suggested awareness could exist independently of brain function. Patients described encountering deceased relatives who provided information that was later verified, received knowledge about future events that proved accurate, and underwent personality changes that persisted long after recovery. The medical implications were revolutionary. If consciousness could exist during clinical death, then current understanding of the relationship between brain and mind was fundamentally incorrect. Van Lommel's research suggested that consciousness might be a field phenomenon that could operate independently of neural activity under specific conditions. Dr. Dean Radin entered paranormal research as a telecommunications engineer and statistician whose expertise was in detecting patterns in random data and exposing statistical fraud. He approached psychic research with the certainty that proper statistical analysis would reveal the errors and deceptions that created false impressions of paranormal phenomena. Radin's initial work focused on analyzing decades of psychic research data to identify the methodological flaws and statistical errors that he assumed explained apparently positive results. Instead, he discovered that the most rigorous studies showed the strongest evidence for psychic phenomena, while weaker studies showed weaker effects, exactly the opposite of what he expected if the phenomena were illusory. His meta-analysis of remote viewing experiments revealed statistical significance that exceeded 6 standard deviations from chance, a result so unlikely that it would occur by accident less than once in a billion trials. More remarkable was the discovery that effect sizes increased when experimental controls were tightened, suggesting that psychic phenomena became more evident under the most rigorous scientific conditions. The turning point came when Radin conducted his own experiments using protocols designed to eliminate every possible source of error, fraud, or statistical artifact. Working with subjects who claimed no special psychic abilities, he consistently documented small but statistically significant evidence of telepathy, precognition, and psychokinesis. Radin's conversion was based purely on statistical evidence. The data showed beyond reasonable doubt that human consciousness could access information and influence physical systems through means that conventional science couldn't explain. His research suggested that psychic phenomena were real but subtle effects that required sophisticated statistical analysis to detect reliably. Analysis of these conversions reveals consistent patterns that illuminate why even the most hardened skeptics eventually acknowledge paranormal phenomena when confronted with sufficient evidence. First, conversion typically occurs gradually as researchers exhaust conventional explanations for increasingly impossible data. Second, the evidence that converts skeptics is always rigorously documented and repeatable under controlled conditions. Third, conversion carries significant professional costs that suggest genuine conviction rather than opportunistic belief change. The most significant pattern is that converted skeptics don't become credulous believers in all paranormal claims. Instead, they develop more sophisticated understanding of which phenomena have genuine evidential support versus which remain questionable. Their skeptical training helps them distinguish between genuine anomalies and false positives, making their testimony particularly valuable. These conversions also reveal the inadequacy of current scientific paradigms for explaining consciousness-related phenomena. Each converted skeptic discovered evidence that human consciousness operates according to principles that materialist science cannot accommodate. Their research suggests that expanding scientific understanding requires acknowledging phenomena that contradict fundamental assumptions about the nature of mind and reality. Every skeptic who publicly acknowledged paranormal evidence paid significant professional costs for their honesty. Academic positions were lost, research funding disappeared, and professional reputations were damaged by admission that materialist science couldn't explain everything they had observed. This professional martyrdom provides powerful evidence for the authenticity of their conversions. These individuals had every incentive to maintain their skeptical positions and continue receiving the professional rewards that came with defending scientific orthodoxy. Their willingness to sacrifice career advancement for evidential integrity speaks to the overwhelming nature of the evidence they encountered. The pattern suggests that acknowledging paranormal phenomena requires unusual intellectual courage, especially for individuals whose professional identities are built on scientific skepticism. The converted skeptics demonstrate that genuine scientific thinking sometimes requires abandoning comfortable assumptions when evidence demands paradigm change. The conversion of prominent skeptics has begun legitimizing paranormal research within mainstream science. Universities now offer courses in consciousness studies. Medical schools include training in near-death experiences, and government agencies fund research into psychic phenomena for intelligence applications. This shift suggests that scientific understanding is gradually expanding to accommodate phenomena that previous paradigms couldn't explain. The evidence documented by converted skeptics provides a foundation for developing new theoretical frameworks that can integrate paranormal phenomena with conventional scientific knowledge. The ultimate implication is that human consciousness possesses capabilities that extend far beyond current scientific understanding. The converted skeptics have documented evidence that awareness can transcend the limitations of space, time, and physical death, discoveries that could revolutionize human understanding of our place in the cosmos. The evidence is undeniable. The world's most hardcore skeptics have been forced to abandon their materialist worldview when confronted with paranormal phenomena that science cannot explain. From near-death experiences to psychic phenomena, from mediumship to consciousness survival, the evidence has converted even the most ruthless debunkers into believers. These weren't gullible individuals seeking confirmation. These were trained scientists whose professional reputations were built on exposing fraud and defending rational thinking. When such individuals publicly acknowledge the paranormal, their testimony carries weight that cannot be dismissed. Don't let this evidence remain hidden. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and share this video with everyone who needs to see how even the most skeptical minds have been forced to acknowledge that reality is far stranger than science imagined.